This video is the result of a bit of fun. I fed one of my publications into an AI program and asked it to create a video summarizing the paper, and it did it rather well. The video was fun, but the topic is rather serious. It's about improving management education. I hope you enjoy it.
Here's a pretty wild question for you. Are the very institutions we trust to train our future leaders actually overlooking decades of research on how people really learn? We're about to dive into a paper that suggests, yeah, maybe they are. And the implications? They're huge. Let's get into it.
So our guide for this exploration is a paper by George Rozier, which was published in the International Journal of Management Education. And what it does is point to this really strange and pretty important gap between two fields you'd think would be talking to each other all the time: higher education research and management education.
Okay, so just how separate are these two worlds? I mean, you'd assume they're in a constant conversation, right? But the paper argues there's this kind of invisible wall between them. And the evidence it lays out is, well, it's pretty startling.
And this slide right here is where things get really interesting. Check out the data for a guy named Ferenc Martin. He's a total pioneer in the science of learning. That big bar on the left, that shows he's been cited over 750 times in top higher education journals. But now, look at that tiny little bar on the right. In top management education journals, just 43 times. I mean, that's not a gap, that's a chasm.
And look, this isn't just some academic squabble about who's citing who. The paper makes the case that this points to a massive missed opportunity. If business schools aren't even engaging with this research, they might be using teaching methods that science has shown are, well, just not as effective. They might even be counterproductive when it comes to developing real-world leaders.
So to really get what's being missed here, we've got to look at the absolute core of all this student learning research. And it all kicks off with this really fundamental idea about how students approach their studies in the first place.
On one side, you've got what's called the surface approach. You know this, we've all been there. You cram facts, you memorize just enough to pass the test, and then poof, it's all gone a week later. But then on the other side, you've got the deep approach. This is where you're actually engaging with the material, trying to connect it to stuff you already know and genuinely trying to understand it.
This table breaks it down even further. On the deep side, notice that the motivation comes from actual interest. Students are trying to link new ideas to old ones. But on the surface side, it's usually driven by a fear of failure, which just leads to memorizing stuff without really getting it. The big takeaway here is crystal clear. If your goal is to build skills like complex problem solving and innovation, you have to design for a deep approach. And just like that, the mission for any educator becomes crystal clear. It's not just about delivering information. It's about designing an entire learning experience that actively pushes students away from that surface approach and pulls them toward a deep one.
So how do you actually do that? Well, the research offers a really powerful framework to help educators out. Let's talk about something called constructive alignment.
The paper calls this a deceptively simple idea, and I love that. It basically means that everything in your course, what you want students to learn, how you teach them, and how you test them, has to be perfectly linked together. So if you say you want students to critically analyze something, but your final exam is just a bunch of multiple choice questions on facts, your course is not aligned. Simple as that.
And here's the good news. The research shows that educators actually have control over the most important factors here. I mean, think about it. They're the ones designing the tests, choosing the teaching methods, setting the workload. All these things you see on the slide, they're the levers that educators can pull. They have the power to shape the whole learning environment.
Okay, so let's get even more specific. Within this big framework, the paper shines a spotlight on one tool in particular that has produced just incredible, evidence-backed results. It's called variation theory. You know, in the world of academic research, they don't just throw words around like dramatic. So when a researcher says an intervention has shown dramatic improvements, yeah, it's time to sit up and pay very close attention.
The theory itself is actually pretty intuitive. The source material gives this fantastic analogy. Imagine trying to spot a black cat on a dark night. It's pretty much impossible, right? There's no contrast, there's no variation.
But if you take that same cat and place it in a snowy field, bam! Suddenly you can see everything. Its shape, its color, its movement, it all pops because it's varying against that static white background. This is the very first step of learning, being able to discern something. But to really truly understand the cat, you need more. You have to see it in different contexts, right? Hunting, sleeping, playing. The concept, the cat, is the same, but the situation is always changing. And that is how we learn to see the core of an idea and apply it broadly.
So what happens when you actually use this theory in a real class? Well, a study was done on an accounting course. When they applied variation theory, this was the percentage of students who got a good understanding of the main concepts, 85%. Now let's put that number in perspective.
And this is where it gets crazy. As this chart shows, in the old traditional version of the course, only about 26% of students really understood the material. But with some pretty simple changes based on variation theory, that number skyrocketed to 85%. That is more than a threefold increase in effective learning. It's just incredible.
So yeah, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. The paper's conclusion is simple. It is time for management education to finally bridge this gap and put literally decades of powerful research into practice.
And it doesn't just point out the problem. It lays out a clear path forward. First, just explore this body of research. Then, apply the core principles we've talked about, like constructive alignment and variation theory. And finally, and this is crucial, evaluate the impact. Use the tools to see what's actually working and what isn't.
And look, this isn't about telling people to throw out everything they're doing and start from scratch. Not at all. It's an invitation to enhance the art of teaching with the science of learning, to make smart, strategic, evidence-based tweaks that can have a massive impact.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty important question. The science on how to create deeper, more lasting learning, it's not a secret. It's out there for anyone to find. So in a world that needs more critical and adaptive thinking than ever before, what's the real cost of ignoring it?